Hello, everyone, and welcome to Slash Film Daily for March 14th, 2018. On today's show, we will dive into the Star Wars Last Jedi special features on the home video release at the water cooler, and in our feature presentation, we'll consider if all the studios should adopt inclusion riders. This is Slash Film Editor-in-Chief Peter Sciretta, and joining me on today's podcast is Slash Film Weekend Editor Brad Oman.
Hey, that's me.
Okay, guys, we have both seen at least the documentary on the Star Wars Last Jedi, which is now out, I think, just on VOD. It comes out on physical media in 2 weeks or so. I have no idea why studios do that. Do you have any idea, Brad?
Yeah, I think we've talked about this before or something like that, but there's studios are kind of making the push now to get people to start buying more digital copies instead of physical copies. And so having the digital copy available first before Blu-ray and DVD convinces more people to buy it sooner because that's when it's available, as opposed to waiting to have to buy it on Blu-ray and DVD.
Now, I don't buy physical copies of movies. My entire library now is in the cloud virtually, but I know you have a huge collection and you bought this digitally, so apparently it worked.
I actually didn't buy this digitally. My friend bought it digitally, and we share iTunes accounts.
Oh, okay. Well, then it didn't work. Okay, but on this home video release, there's a lot of special features, which I'll talk about some of the other ones later. But I wanted to talk about this documentary. There's a feature-length documentary called "The Director and The Jedi." It's like an hour and 45 minutes or something like that.
Hour and 35 minutes, yeah.
35 minutes. I guess, to talk about this in any depth, we have to say that we're going to be discussing spoilers for a documentary on the making of a movie.
Well, I mean, at the very least, we're definitely talking about spoilers for The Last Jedi, and then, we're giving this a spoiler warning simply because Peter and I had to talk about this on our Slack. I think that with a documentary, the most interesting thing about it, and the things that are quote-unquote spoiled, are if you reveal things that are discussed in the documentary or shown, things that you might not expect and are interesting to see for the first time, in unfolding as they were captured, on camera on set. So,
see, in my mind, I'm of a totally different mind. I'm in the mind of we know how this movie turns out. We know the decisions that the directors and the filmmakers and the actors make. So, saying...
I think there's a lot of
saying something. I think it's more about the documentary is more about seeing how it happened,
right,
seeing.
Yeah, I agree with you, but I also think that there's some things that we didn't know about the production and that are interesting to see where when you're watching it and it's a new piece of information to you, you're like, oh wow, that's really interesting, and I don't know, I just feel like it makes the experience that much more engaging.
Yeah. Okay, let's just start off firstly with what did you think of this documentary?
I loved it. It was even better than I thought it was going to be. I know you have some qualms with the Force Awakens feature-length documentary that was included when that came out on home video. And I still really enjoyed it just because I love any glimpse behind the scenes of making a movie. But that...
Well, I just want to say that the problem with the Force Awakens documentary is... I have two problems. First of all, the documentary opens up with all the actors basically being like, what can we talk to you about? I'm not sure, what we're allowed to say. And it feels like that, the entire documentary. It feels like a studio-created featurette that, was made inside the mystery box without getting complete access to the mystery box.
Yeah,
it doesn't feel like they even, go in depth and detail about some of the more spoilery things about that movie, because I'm guessing the documentary filmmakers weren't even given access to those scenes and those parts. But anyways, go on. Sorry.
Yeah, well, so on kind of on the opposite end of the spectrum is this is a documentary that assumes you've seen the movie, doesn't try to hide anything, is a very in-depth and extensive look behind the scenes with showing all of the behind the scenes production blemishes and all. I think what I like most about this is it shows the sheer difficulty of taking on a project of this scale and how nervous and stressed Rian Johnson was at times. some of the honest and candid conversations he has with Ron Bergman, who's the producer of this movie, are really they're intimate and they're fascinating. And there's moments with Rian Johnson and Mark Hamill, where they're talking about the character path of Luke Skywalker, and Mark Hamill saying a lot of what we've heard him say already in the publicity rounds of how he wasn't necessarily happy with the arc that Ryan took Luke on. And you really kind of see how almost like sad and in a way a little bit dejected Hamill is in this. Like, he really seems like he's having a hard time processing this version of Luke, but ultimately comes around to it. And I think my favorite moment in this documentary actually is when towards the end of it, Rian Johnson comes and he has like this little private moment with Luke after they've shot a scene, and he tells him the title of the movie, and it's at a point when only like a couple people know what the title is, and so he tells him, he's like, it's The Last Jedi, and Mark Hamill's like, oh, he's like, that's me, and he was like, yeah, and he's like, and so it's like, it's almost like oh man, like he's like not that he fully accepts it or like has this whole new understanding, but like I think that helped him feel better about it.
Yeah, no, seeing this documentary is called The Director and The Jedi, and it is really at the center point of that. It is about Mark Hamill's resistance to the story that Rian Johnson and what Rian Johnson has done with this character he's played for decades, and it's so compelling and interesting to see Mark Hamill kind of grapple with that. But at the same time, it's not like Mark Hamill was like, F you, I'm not going to do this movie. Like he still, tried to do everything Ryan wanted him to do in the movie. Do you know what I mean? Like, he still gave it his all.
Yeah, exactly. There's even one moment when they're shooting that flashback when he's watching the Jedi Temple burn down. And I don't know if he's just so caught up in the character moment or if he's having a real moment of like sadness himself after that scene, because like
they call cut and he's like still like bawling on the ground.
Yeah, he's like kneeling and it's like he's holding himself up like by one of his fists, and like Rian Johnson comes over to like talk to him quietly. You don't hear what he says, but like it seems like he's kind of consoling him and like probably telling him good job and that kind of thing. But he's down there for like a good 30 seconds or so, kind of still processing or something along those lines.
Yeah, it should be said that this documentary wasn't made by like one of the home video team guys. This was made by Anthony Wonky, I think. Wonk. I don't know how to pronounce his last name, but he's won Emmy awards. He's won the BAFTA award for Syria, Children of the Frontline. He's done some serious documentary work, and it shows by this documentary. Like, it feels like he was on set every day. I'm not sure if that's the case, but just seeing every aspect of this production is pretty amazing. I think we were talking before about how crazy the secrecy on this production is, which I know it seems obvious for it being a Star Wars production, but at one point Andy Serkis arrives on set for the first time, and Rian Johnson pulls him aside and is like, I just want to tell you now, your character dies. And just Andy Serkis didn't get the script before he arrived on set and wasn't told that his character is going to die. That's crazy.
I mean, to be fair, do you need a script and know what's going to happen with your character before you agree to do a Star Wars movie?
No, but you'd think he would want to see the script before he arrives to prepare, or I don't know.
Well, in that particular sequence, I don't think he arrived to shoot right then. I think that he was visiting the set while they were shooting something else, and that's when Ryan.
Okay, there's another moment where the costume designer is going over the costumes. He's talked with Rian Johnson in depth. This isn't the first costume meeting, and he's they're talking about what they're going to do with Benicio del Toro's character, and he's like, well, he's the villain in the movie, so blah blah blah, and Rian Johnson's like, no, he's not the villain. Don't listen to the internet. Yeah, and I'm just like, wait, the costume designer has not read the script.
Yeah.
I don't know. It's just kind of insane. Some of the special effects, seeing when Kylo and Rey have their force time moment and they're touching each other in the hut, and Luke comes in and kind of explodes the hut. all that was done in practically, and you get to see it amazing.
Yeah, that was impressive to see. Like, they had a whole bunch of the stone pieces hooked up to wires that they just yanked away, and it looks so cool when they show how they did it. It was awesome.
I think some of the best moments in this doc have probably been put online. Like, I love Mark Hamill visiting Yoda for the first time while Frank Oz is trying to recreate the magic, with the Yoda puppet. It's just like so emotional. Carrie Fisher's moments on set are probably exaggeratedly emotional just because of, she's not here anymore. What other moments would you like to talk about in the documentary?
Let's see, gosh. Seeing the screen test that John Boyega and Kelly Marie Tran did when she was, I think, essentially auditioning for Rose still, or maybe it was just the first time they were like seeing how they work together on camera. But that was cool, and that kind of gives us our explanation as to why there was a particular shot in the Last Jedi sizzle reel that came out a little while back of John Boyega in a Resistance pilot uniform with a different haircut, and it's because they shot that before they were even in production on the movie, and they were just testing things out. So that was really cool to see happen as well. And it's like, I just think what's so great about it is it's a front to back making of documentary. Like just all the cool stuff they show from workshopping the script and rehearsing outside on the Pinewood Studios lot with Mark Hamill and Daisy Ridley. To the construction of the sets, seeing how in depth the creature creations was awesome. The creation of the sea cow on Octu. That was.
I was watching this with my girlfriend Kitra, and she was like, "Oh my god, I assumed that whole thing was just CG." Like, but it's entirely practical, and they had to like airlift it onto the what was it, onto the island, or was it? No, I think it was the Ireland seaside.
No, it was. I think that was the island actually. I think that was the Skelly Michael where they were shooting, and they brought it to like the side where the ocean was.
No, it's just it's crazy how much work goes into these, and this shouldn't be a revelation to anybody. This should be an obvious fact, but for a writer-director that's working on a film for 2-3 years, it amazes me how much Ryan understands of every little word and moment and why everything matters, and explaining moments to Daisy Ridley, explaining moments to Mark Hamill, explaining why something's important. Why it amazes me how much of a grasp. I mean, it shouldn't amaze me because I feel like that's what a director needs to know. Do you know what I mean? Like that, the director needs to understand why each moment is important. But it's just like, Ryan's just so smart. And also watching this documentary, you get to see how worn out he gets over the production. By the end of it, like, he feels like he looks like he's getting no sleep.
Yeah, I mean, there's like a nice little collection of moments where they show how tired people are getting as the production is going into the final days. Like, Ryan's sleeping in random parts of the set. Like, there's one where he's like sleeping on his back on the Battle of Crate set, or one where he's sleeping in the little nook on the Millennium Falcon where Chewbacca gets treated in The Force Awakens after he gets shot in the arm. And so yeah, it's funny just to see, how like just the level of exhaustion that comes when you have such a big shoot. And they were talking too about they shot for like 120 some days it was in total, and they didn't really have like much of a break except for like 10 days for Christmas, I think they said. So they go through the calendar and you see just how much work that they've been putting and how long they've been going nonstop on getting that movie done. And this is also a movie too where you find out that they we've talked about this before, and I think there was an article on Slashroom about it, but how they built like 120 sets for this movie, which is insane.
Yeah, if you're shooting that's like shooting a set a day. I mean, it's not necessarily shooting a set a day, but that's on average, which is insane. There's a lot more stuff on this home video release. I keep on wanting to say Blu-ray release, but I don't have the Blu-ray. There's deleted scenes. There's like a lot of deleted scenes. There's like
14 deleted scenes.
Yeah, I almost want to say it's like 30-40 minutes or something worth of deleted scenes, including the deleted scene with the caretakers, the last lesson, which we've talked about before. I watched them all. Half of them you can totally understand why they're gone. Half of them I wish they were in the movie. There is an extended chase sequence in Canto Bight, which is my least favorite segment of that movie, but I almost wish this extended chase sequence is in there because, as you saw in the documentary, I know you haven't seen this deleted scene, Brad, but as you saw in the documentary, they just had so many creature effects, so many costumes in Canto Bight, and we see like almost none of them in the movie compared to how many were created. And in this chase sequence, you definitely get a much bigger scope of all that. And I kind of wish that was in there. The only other special feature I wanted to talk about that I saw, which I know you haven't seen yet, is they have the video footage of Andy Serkis on set playing Snoke, because he played it with performance capture, and they basically present the entire scenes that he is in with him on set, performing the character. And watching these segments, it almost makes me wish that J.J. Abrams had cast Andy Serkis as maybe not a human character, but not as a CG creation, that he could have been augmented with, physical makeup and stuff like that. Because watching him, yell at Rey, and he has like these tears coming down his like eyes, and this just like, it's almost more powerful than watching, the creation, which is very good in the movie, of Snoke. I think watching Andy Serkis is almost more powerful than watching that CG creation of Snoke. So I almost wish we could have got the alternate universe version where Andy Serkis was playing Andy Serkis in the movie. But have you checked out any of the other special features?
No, that's pretty much it. I've started listening to the commentary because we've got a little thing about the most interesting stuff we learned from the commentary that I'm putting together to go up sometime before the end of this week. So keep an eye out for that. But
how is that?
I'm not too far into it, but it's definitely interesting. Like Ryan, it's all Ryan Johnson talking about different things that maybe they had planned at some point, and talking about the vibe on set and what's happening. Right from the beginning, he talks about how there was almost an alternate opening shot for the movie.
Oh, yeah, that's on the deleted scenes, actually. It's with Finn waking up.
Yeah, so initially what they were going to do was pan down from the opening crawl, and it was going to be the medical pod helmet that Finn was wearing, but it was going to make it look like it was a planet, because since normally the opening crawls usually pan down to a planet of some sort. And so you were going to think that it was a planet, but then it was slowly going to reveal that it was actually that helmet. But Ryan Johnson said that it was a little too slow of a start, and it took them too long to really like kind of get the movie cracking, and like he really needed to like get the movie moving at a faster pace from the get-go.
Yeah. The other thing I took a peek at was we talked about yesterday on the podcast, if you get this movie on iTunes, Amazon, any of the services that you have linked to your Movies Anywhere account, which, by the way, if you haven't done that, you should do that just because it would be stupid not to. If you go into your Movies Anywhere app, which I have on my Apple TV, you get a bonus special feature, which is watching the entire film just with John Williams' score, with no sound effects, no dialogue. And I watched the throne room sequence just with John Williams' score, and it's kind of amazing. Like I feel like you weren't on the podcast yesterday, Brad, but Ben was talking about how you watch movies in the background while you're working, and how he couldn't do that. And he was like, and he suggested like, this is probably a way he could watch movies in the background if they had more just movie scores. And I could totally, I also have the problem of I can't watch a movie because I would get sucked into it. But with the score, like it's basically just like listening to a movie score, but having visuals to go along with it. It's amazing how much you miss of the score that's, going on underneath, the dialogue and the sound effects and everything, the world creation that they do in the movie. So I'd recommend everybody check that out. And you said you're going to have a piece in the commentary tomorrow on the site?
Yeah, it should be tomorrow or Thursday, depending on whenever people are listening to this. But yeah, it should be up sometime Thursday morning. I'm hoping to finish it up tonight.
Okay, before we go into our feature presentation, Brad, where can people find more of your work online?
Always with the slashfilm.com, also on Twitter at Ethan_Anderton. And you can also check out my podcast, Go Flix Yourself, on iTunes. We've got an episode coming up where we're going to take the time to recast Justice League, just for the hell of it.
Oh, and, if we didn't make this abundantly clear, I think you need to see this documentary. And you need to see these special features. I honestly would have paid $20 just to watch this documentary alone and not had the movie. Like, that's how good it is. Go check it out. It is on all the digital purchase services and not rental services. What would you call them? Digital
download services?
Yes, exactly.
And if you haven't actually done it yet, download Movies Anywhere, because it's just good to have, because it links all of the digital movies you have across Vudu, Amazon, iTunes, Amazon Prime, and Fandango Now just recently joined. So it's just a great way to bring together almost all of the digital movies you have. There's a couple movie studios that haven't agreed to be part of the Movies Anywhere crossover, and that's Paramount and Lionsgate. But otherwise, all the movies from Sony, Warner Brothers, Disney, all that, you can all have them all combined in your Movies Anywhere app and watch them digitally.
And not just in your Movies Anywhere app. I'm not sure if you know this, Brad, but if you buy something on Amazon,
it crosses over into iTunes and vice versa.
So everything's unlocked everywhere. There's no reason not to do it. But yes, joining me for the segment is Slash Film senior writer Ben Pearson.
Hey, what's up?
And writer Wytran Bowie.
Hey, everyone.
Okay, so the Academy Awards was, last week now? It seems like it was a month ago. And Frances McDormand made this big speech about how everybody should be adopting this inclusion rider. Ben, you wrote this article for the site last week talking about that, and you've talked about it briefly here. But could you give us the rundown of what is an inclusion rider?
Sure, yeah. It's basically like a contractual stipulation that essentially demands racial and gender diversity for at least 50% of a project's cast and crew. So this was an important thing that Frances McDormand did, because she's been working in the industry for 35 years, and she said that she only just now found out about this. So by speaking out at the Oscars, such a big platform to all of these power players in the industry, and letting them know that this is a thing that exists and is a weapon that they can have at their disposal. I was talking about how it could actually result in some measurable, significant changes to Hollywood, and we're actually seeing that already. So there are a couple different production companies that have already adopted inclusion writers, or made the announcements, rather, that they're going to be adopting inclusion writers on projects moving forward. So Michael B. Jordan has a production company called Outlier Society, and he was one of the first to announce that he's going to be implementing these inclusion writers. Ben Affleck and Matt Damon's Pearl Street Films production company also made a similar announcement a few days later. And then Paul Feig, the director of Bridesmaids and Ghostbusters, has also committed his, I think it's called Feigco Entertainment, his production company, to be adopting them as well. So we're already seeing, pretty significant portions of the industry and big names taking McDormand's message to heart, which is great news.
Okay, I will admit, when I was in high school, and I heard the idea of affirmative action, at first I was like, that's kind of bullshit. I was like, the person who's best for the job should get the job. It shouldn't matter, the color of the skin, the sex of the person. Of course, I'm saying this as a young white male who doesn't know any better. I've since kind of, gone through almost 20 years of my life and realized that doesn't happen. The best person for the job doesn't get the job. It's usually the white male that gets the job. But do you think? There's actually. Let's jump into this, because Netflix has come out and said that they will not adopt inclusion writers for their projects. Ben, you talked about that in your article as well, right?
Yeah, so Reed Hastings, who's the CEO of Netflix, was asked if they had any interest in adopting inclusion writers for the shows or the films that they're producing. And he said to USA Today, quote, "We're not so big on doing everything through agreements. We're trying to do things creatively." And USA Today said that Hastings would rather have his staff speak with the filmmakers about how many women and people of color are working on the project before shooting begins. So, that's one of those things that on the surface of it is really easy to jump to outrage and be upset by this sort of decision.
Is he wrong or is he right in that statement?
Well, obviously, each company has their prerogative, right? It's not a requirement going forward that all companies adopt this thing. It's just sort of like a best practices thing that would be good to move Hollywood through some of the barriers and break down some of those barriers that have been in place, since the industry has existed. Really, and going back really quickly to your diversity hire affirmative action kind of illusion there, Peter, earlier. I should point out, because I've seen a lot of people bring this up in terms of inclusion writers because they think that these quote unquote diversity hires are going to negatively impact a show or a movie's storyline. But there's an excerpt.
That's just racist.
Well, just in terms of forcing creative people to alter the story in order to include, X percentage of people in front of the camera. But I should say that there's the Hollywood Reporter wrote in 2014 about inclusion writers, and really they were one of the first big publications to actually put this forth into the world. And there's an excerpt from their article that says, "The clause would state that tertiary speaking characters should match the gender distribution of the setting for the film as long as it's sensible for the plot." And I think that's a lot of times what falls to the wayside in those arguments that people have is that, it's not trying to force these decisions onto creators and make them physically alter the stories that they're trying to tell. It's just dropping it in there when it makes sense for what's going on in order to better reflect the actual world that we live in terms of racial and gender demographics. So getting back to Netflix, it's a matter of should they be using inclusion writers or should they not? And, in an ideal world, maybe, sure, yeah, across the board, it would be great if everybody adopted these. But I feel like that's not entirely a realistic thing to want. And I think looking at Netflix in particular, they have a pretty good track record in terms of representation. They have made movies and shows with supremely racially diverse casts. Marco Polo, Sense8, Narcos, Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon, Sword of Destiny, Okja, The Cloverfield Paradox, things that have been projects that have been led by women, like Orange is the New Black, I Don't Feel at Home in This World Anymore, Gerald's Game, The Incredible Jessica James. I mean, they have a lot, and it's partially because Netflix produces such a vast amount of content, but still, in terms of just by the sheer numbers of it, Netflix looks pretty good in terms of what they've done for people of color and women in front of the camera. They do have some issues behind the camera, but still, I think that I don't know, Peter. Do you have any thoughts on this? Do you want to chime in?
I want to hear the only non-white male person who is on this show's opinion of this, because I think they probably have something more to say than I think we probably can offer. So, HC, what are your thoughts on this?
Well, like both of you, the first time I heard about an inclusion writer was at Frances McDormand's speech at the Academy Awards, and I thought it was a great idea. I mean, I think that there is a huge disparity for people of color and between people of color and white men working in Hollywood. And the reason that we have a lot of problems with diversity on screen is because there isn't enough diversity behind the camera. And I think inclusion writers are a good first step. I kind of agree with Ben in that I don't think that they have to be mandatory, but for now, I think it's a really good show of goodwill and for a step in the right direction for this industry, which is kind of at this sort of tipping point in terms of representation and how they deal with issues of harassment and sexual misconduct. So inclusion writers are a really interesting concept, I think, and a good thing to include in contractual obligations, because it allows people with greater power to sort of leverage that influence they have to bring people up who don't have the opportunity that the straight white male has in Hollywood. Like you're kind of saying it earlier about affirmative action, Peter, and how it seems like that on paper that is a mistake because everyone should just be picked by the quality of their work and not just by their skin color. But that's not the case because a lot of the times people of color and minorities don't have the same opportunities. They may have that same level of creativity and talent, but they come from either low-income areas or that they have to work much harder to get the same opportunities as white people. So I think that the inclusion rider is in the way of affirmative action and a really good step for people of color and who don't really get to see those opportunities usually in Hollywood. So I'm all about inclusion riders. I don't see any negatives for now. I mean, like they're really new to me, so I don't really know much about them. But
is Netflix wrong in saying that they refuse to adopt it because it will hurt their creative vision?
It's not good PR on their part. And I will say that there was that news that came out recently that Claire Foy, who was the star of The Crown, was paid less than her co-star Matt Smith. And I think that inclusion rider is a good way of not only making sure that there's more diversity in front and behind the camera, it's a way of making sure that there's less of disparity all across the board. So maybe it would benefit them to have an inclusion writers in their contracts. But I mean, like, there's no way to sort of force them to do it. I think it probably would be a good idea in general. But yeah, it's bad optics on their part to refuse it altogether.
Yeah, it's just such a weird statement because Netflix is so creator driven. You know, they're acquiring all this talent that is the directors, the filmmakers, the showrunners that are making their content. And I feel like someone like the CEO of Netflix, they're, if you look at their vision as a company, I think that the better statement would have been like, as a company, no, we're not going to adopt inclusion writers because we don't think, that it could hamper the creative vision, but we are in service of our creators. And if they want to adopt the inclusion writers, we support them 100%. Like, I feel like that would be what Netflix should have said. And I do agree with Ben that Netflix, over other, creators out there are very diversified. So maybe it's not as big of a deal. It just seems like such a bad way to say it.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think ultimately the statement that he made was that because, he would rather have his staff talk with the filmmakers directly about this, rather than like adopting an across the board thing. I think that is the sentiment that he's trying to get at, Peter. He just didn't say it in a way that that would have been a little bit better from an optics perspective.
I wonder if he's concerned that adopting inclusion writers across the board would scare away some creators, because Netflix seems to be of the mind that they want as many creators as possible, and it's just kind of this big collection of creators and showrunners and producers. I wonder if they don't want to sort of leave out any creators who would be against inclusion writers. I don't know. That's sort of speculation on my part, but
yeah. Well, we'll have to see how if this changes at all, and how Hollywood is going to change as more of these production companies start to adopt these inclusion writers, and it'll be interesting to see. It's our world is so much of a reflection of what we see on these screens, either on our TV, on our iPhone, on our big screen. And things people say on those programs and movies are adopted into our life like nothing. And seeing, casts and a crew that is as diversified as our real life, I think is something important for us to see, and I think we're slowly getting there. We're slowly moving in that direction. I think most of Hollywood is kind of liberal in that way, and I think hopefully that has a good effect on the world that adopts this pop culture into their lives. But I think this draws this episode of Slash Film Daily to a close. Ben, where can people find more of your work online?
You can find me at slashfilm.com, and you can track me down on Twitter at Ben Pears.
HT, where can people find more of your work online?
You can find me on slashfilm.com every day, and I'm on Twitter at HTranBuoy.
You can find this article and every article we mentioned on this podcast on slashfilm.com. This podcast, Slash Film Daily, is published every weekday on iTunes, Google Play, Overcast, all the popular podcast apps. Please go rate and review this podcast on iTunes. Spread the word, tell your friends, and we'll see you tomorrow.